In the vast, dusty annals of cinematic history, few years resonate with the thunderous echo of gunfire and the clinking of spurs quite like 1993 it was. The year Tombstone charged onto the silver screen, not merely as a revival of the Western genre, but as a defining cultural phenomenon. With its tale of brotherhood lawlessness and the thin line between justice and vengeance, the film etched itself into the collective memory of a generation. It wasn't just the sharp dialogue or the stylized action that captivated us. It was the ensemble cast, a gathering of titans who breathed fire and soul into historical figures, making them immortal. But when the director yells "cut" and the stage lights dim, the actors return to a reality far more complex than any script. Decades have passed since they walked the dusty streets of the OK Corral time. The ultimate storyteller has carved unique paths for each of them. Some continued to soar on the wings of fame, while others found solace in quiet obscurity, and some tragically met their own sunsets far too soon. Join me as we peel back the curtain of the silver screen to explore the profound Robert Mitchum as the narrator. Our journey begins not with a face, but with a voice that rumbles like thunder over a canyon, ancient and knowing in Tombstone. Robert Mitchum did not need to draw a gun or ride a horse to make his presence felt. As the narrator, his baritone delivery set the stage, lending the film an epic, almost mythical quality. At 76 years old, his lines were more than mere exposition. They were the weary observations of a man who had seen the best and worst of humanity. This gravity was not an act. It was the resonance of a soul forged in the fires of genuine hardship. Born Robert Charles Derman Mitchum. In 1917, his life was a script written in the ink of tragedy long before he ever reached Hollywood. Losing his father at the tender age of 2, Mitchum's childhood was a nomadic struggle through poverty, wandering from city to city like a leaf in a gale. By 16, he was intimately familiar with the inside of a reform school, a young man hardened by a world that offered him no favors. In the quiet of the night, he would lie awake, the haunting whistle of freight trains serving as his lullaby, reminding him of the days he rode the rails clinging to boxcars in a desperate search for work. These raw, abrasive experiences chiseled the cynical, jaded persona that would later define his screen presence. When he starred in film noir classics like Out of the Past 1947, he wasn't playing a character, he was channeling the shadows of his own existence. Off-screen, Mitchum lived a life of duality. He was a man who craved stability, yet was constantly seduced by chaos. His marriage to Dorothy Spence, his teenage sweetheart, stood as a pillar of permanence in his shifting world. Yet the siren song of Hollywood and the allure of breathtaking co-stars led him down winding paths of infidelity with icons like Ava Gardner. Through it all, Dorothy remained a silent anchor, enduring the storms for nearly 60 years. But the internal wars Mitchum fought, the family tensions, the personal failures, drove him deeper into the embrace of alcohol and smoke. These were his comforts and his poisons, habits that slowly claimed their price. As the years advanced, the formidable physique that once dominated the screen began to wither. Lung cancer and emphysema became his constant companions, sapping the strength of the once imposing figure. In his final act, his children grown and scattered, Mitchum faced the quiet specter of loneliness left, with only the ghosts of his memories. The man who had narrated the legends of the West found his own story drawing to a close. On July 1st, 1997, the voice finally fell silent. Robert Mitchum passed away in his sleep with Dorothy, the witness to his every triumph and heartbreak, by his side. He left behind a legacy of haunting performances, but his true bequest was the sadness in his gaze, a reflection of a life lived fully, if painfully, in the shadows. Charlton Heston as Henry Hooker. We move from the voice of the legend to a figure of monumental stature. In Tombstone, Charlton Heston appeared as Henry Hooker, the seasoned rancher who offers sanctuary to Wyatt Earp. At 70 years old, Heston had few lines, but his presence was tectonic. He brought a moral weight to the screen, a majestic dignity that required no dialogue to convey. He was the embodiment of the principled West. However, the man behind this granite exterior carried a heart scarred by a lifetime of private pain, a stark contrast to the heroes he portrayed. Heston's origins were far removed from the grandeur of Ben-Hur, or the Ten Commandments. Born in 1923, his childhood was marred by the gray misery of the Great Depression. The divorce of his parents and the crushing weight of abject poverty left fractures in his psyche that fame could never fully caulk. As a boy in the backwoods of Michigan, isolation was his primary companion. Hunger was a frequent guest. These wounds of insecurity never truly healed. Even when he stood atop the world as Hollywood's most bankable epic star, he spent a lifetime trying to outrun the memory of that helpless boy in the woods. Ironically, as his celebrity expanded to biblical proportions, the distance between him and those he loved widened. Married to Lydia Clark for an incredible 64 years and a father to Fraser and Holly Heston, often seemed like a statue to his own family. Admired but cold to the touch, he wallowed in the unique loneliness of the living legend. The pressure of being a real-life hero to millions while struggling to connect with the few who mattered most to fill the voids that applause could not reach. He turned to alcohol, a quiet vice that sought to relieve the crushing expectations of his public image. In the twilight of his life, the man who parted the Red Sea faced a darkness he could not command. As he neared 80, the invincible facade cracked. He entered rehab in 2000, acknowledging his human frailty. But a crueler thief was waiting in the wings. Alzheimer's disease crept in slowly, robbing him of the memories that defined his identity. The intellect and strength that were his trademarks were dismantled piece by piece. On April 5, 2008, the epic concluded. Charlton Heston died in his sleep at his Beverly Hills home, aged 84. Lydia was there holding the hand of the man who had been both a global icon and a distant enigma. He left behind a fortune, but his enduring image is that of a hero on the screen who lived as a solitary soul within his own legend. Don Collier as the High Roller. In the chaotic tapestry of Tombstone, there are figures who observe the madness with a cold, knowing detachment. Don Collier played the High Roller, a gambler who watches the bloodshed from the sidelines. Though his time on screen was fleeting, Collier's weathered face and steely gaze left an indelible mark. He looked like a man tempered by the harsh realities of the frontier. This was no accident. Collier's performance was a mirror reflection of his own tumultuous journey through a life that was anything but easy. Born in 1928, just before the world plunged into economic darkness, Collier grew up in the suffocating grip of the Great Depression. Poverty was not a story to him. It was the air he breathed. His youth was a series of grueling labors. He worked as a lumberjack, a sailor, a surveyor, breaking his back to scrape together a living. These years of sweat and toil gave him a rugged authenticity that Hollywood could not manufacture. When he finally turned to acting after serving in the Navy, he brought with him the posture of a man who knew the weight of hard work. Yet the path to stardom is rarely a straight line. Collier fought a long, bitter war with alcoholism, a demon that constantly threatened to derail his ambitions. Coupled with a deep-seated fear of failure, he missed countless opportunities. Despite securing roles in notable westerns like El Dorado and The War Wagon, he often felt like an outsider looking in, much like his character in Tombstone. His personal life bore the brunt of his internal struggles. His first marriage to Sharon Knight crumbled, leaving him with a profound loneliness that lingered even after he found love again with his second wife, Mary Lou. In his later years, Collier found a measure of peace hosting The Desert Speaks, sharing the beauty of the landscape he loved. But a melancholic fog persisted. As he watched his friends and colleagues from the golden age of westerns pass away, one by one he became a living relic lost in the memories of a bygone era. The High Roller finally cashed in his chips on September 13, 2021. Don Collier succumbed to lung cancer in Harrodsburg, Kentucky at the age of 92. He left behind a modest estate but a rich legacy as a steadfast performer who quietly devoted himself to his craft, never seeking the glory of the spotlight, but always delivering the truth of the character. Sanford Gibbons as Father Feeney. In the midst of the gunfire, Tombstone offered brief moments of spiritual respite through Father Feeney, played by Sanford Gibbons. At 60, Gibbons portrayed the compassionate priest who brought glimmers of hope to a lawless land. For Gibbons, this was not merely a role, it was a source of comfort, a reflection of his own lifelong search for peace and resilience in a world that had often been unkind to him. Born in 1933 in Missouri, Gibbons grew up in a strictly religious household. While this environment instilled values in him, it also felt like a cage. He yearned for freedom, for a way to express the emotions swirling within him. Acting became his escape, his breath of fresh air. Early in his career, he showed promise with small roles in the 1960s, but he soon discovered that Hollywood is a grinder of dreams, constant uncertainty. The fierce competition and the struggle to find meaningful work slowly wore down his spirit. In his moments of weakness, Gibbons turned to alcohol. It was meant to be a solace, but it became a shadow that darkened his life for years. He found love with actress Grace Williams, hoping to build a stable sanctuary. But the pressures of the industry and his own personal pain drove a wedge between them. The divorce broke his heart, and although he loved his children, the distance between them grew, leaving him with regrets that would follow him to the grave. He remarried, hoping for a fresh start, but the scars of the past remained visible. In his later years, as the lights of fame dimmed, Gibbons chose a quieter path in Arizona. He wrote, he taught acting, and he spent his days reflecting on the dreams he had chased and the ones that had slipped away. The man who offered spiritual comfort on screen found himself alone with his thoughts on December 29, 2018. At the age of 85, Sanford Gibbons died of a heart attack at his home in Phoenix. His journey ended not with fanfare, but with the quiet closing of a curtain on a life of struggle and silent hope. Grant James as Dr. Goodfellow. In a film defined by bullets and blood, Grant James played Dr. Goodfellow, the devoted physician who stands helpless as the violence escalates. At 58, his role was small, but it resonated with a quiet desperation. This character was a poignant reflection of Grant James, himself, a man of persistence and quiet dignity who often stood on the fringes of the spotlight he so deeply desired to reach. James's journey began in Ohio in 1935. A childhood fractured by the trauma of a broken home and the separation of his parents. These early emotional scars fueled a lifelong hunger for recognition and affection. He wanted to be seen, despite his talents, which led him to roles in Walker, Texas Ranger, and a respected career in voice acting for anime. James remained a working actor. A talent recognized by peers but unknown to the masses, he carried the heavy burden of financial instability, facing periods of unemployment and the constant, crushing pressure to provide. It was a life of near misses that often left him battling low self-esteem. His personal narrative was equally turbulent. His first marriage ended after 6 years, leaving him with a lingering sense of guilt, particularly regarding his relationship with his children. The most devastating blow came in 2009 when his daughter Susan, who had followed his footsteps into acting, died suddenly. It was a void that no amount of applause could fill, though he eventually found companionship and a shared passion for mentoring young artists. With Julie Erickson, the specter of loneliness continued to haunt him. As his health declined, James retreated to a quiet life in Spokane, Washington. He spent his final years reflecting on the past, on the roles he played, and the life he lived. He was a man who gave so much to his craft and his students, even when the industry gave little back. Grant James passed away on November 23, 2022, at the age of 87. His estate was modest, but his true wealth lay in the generations of actors he mentored, leaving behind a legacy of passion that ripples forward even in his absence. Pedro Armendariz Jr. as the priest. Another figure of grace in Tombstone was the priest played by Pedro Armendariz Jr. At 53, he brought a touch of compassion to the harsh frontier. But for Armendariz Jr., this role was deeply personal. a reflection of the silent struggles and the towering shadows he lived under for his entire existence. Born in Mexico City in 1940, Pedro carried a name that was heavy with expectation. He was the son of the legendary Pedro Armendáriz Sr. From the moment he stepped onto a set, he lived in the colossal shadow of his father. Despite a prolific career that included appearances in James Bond films and The Mask of Zorro, Armendáriz Jr. was perpetually cast in supporting roles. He was the reliable character actor, never the leading star he yearned to be. This quiet frustration simmered throughout his life, a star that always seemed to orbit, never to shine in the center. His personal life was a landscape of longing. 2 marriages brought hope, but ultimately succumbed to the strain of his profession. The distances, both physical and emotional, became abysses he could not bridge. By the time he was filming major Hollywood blockbusters in the late 90s, he often found himself alone in strange cities, weighed down by the guilt of a father and husband who felt he had failed his loved ones in pursuit of a dream that remained just out of reach. The cruelest irony awaited him in his final years. An actor relies on his eyes to convey truth, but Armendáriz Jr. was diagnosed with eye cancer. Disease threatened not just his life, but his sight, the very gift that bound him to his art. He fought bravely, continuing to work, but the illness consumed him. On December 26, 2011, Pedro Armendáriz Jr. died in New York at the age of 71. He was buried next to his father in Mexico City, finally reunited in rest, closing the chapter on a life of tireless dedication and the heavy burden of a legacy. Powers Booth as Curly Bill Brocious. Every great story needs a formidable darkness, and in Tombstone that darkness was Curly Bill Brocious, played with terrifying charisma by Powers Booth. At 45, Booth didn't just play the outlaw, he commanded the screen with a ruthless intensity. Yet this portrayal of a man without fear was a mask. Beneath the surface of the villain lay a man who appeared resilient, but who secretly wrestled with inner demons and a profound, aching loneliness. Born in the dust of a poor cotton town in Texas in 1948, Booth's early life was shaped by loss. The death of his father left a crater in his world that nothing could truly fill. This grief, however, became fuel. He determined to rise above his circumstances, excelling in sports and finding his voice in the arts. His breakthrough came in 1980 with Guyana Tragedy, where his portrayal of cult leader Jim Jones was so chilling it won him an Emmy. But this triumph was a double-edged sword. Hollywood saw his dark potential and cast him repeatedly as the villain. The weight of these dark souls he inhabited began to consume his spirit. Dragging him into a silent depression, he hid from the world. To the public, his personal life appeared idyllic. He was married to Pam Cole, his college sweetheart, for nearly 50 years, a rarity in show business. Together, they raised 2 children. But behind the glamour, the demands of his career created invisible chasms. The long nights on set, the travel, the mental toll of playing psychopaths and killers separated him from the warmth of his family on screen. He was the man in charge off-screen. He faced long nights of self-doubt. In his final act, the man who played invulnerable villains faced a very human enemy, pancreatic cancer. He fought the battle quietly, pouring his remaining strength into roles on Nashville and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., refusing to let the disease define him. But even the strongest will must eventually yield. On May 14, 2017, Powers Booth died in Los Angeles at the age of 68. He left behind a modest fortune, but a powerful legacy of complex, haunting performances that proved sometimes the bad guys are the most fascinating characters of all. Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday. If there is one performance in Tombstone that transcends acting to become pure alchemy, it is Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday. At 33, Kilmer didn't just play the dying tubercular gunfighter, he inhabited him. His portrayal of a man dancing on the edge of death was mesmerizing, funny, and deeply tragic. This role mirrored Kilmer's own tumultuous journey through fame, heartbreak, and resilience, a life lived at high velocity. Grief was a companion to Kilmer from a young age. As a child, he lost his younger brother Wesley in a drowning accident, a tragedy that shattered his world and left deep invisible scars. This pain shaped his artistic depth, but also made him reserved, intense, and often lonely. He exploded onto the Hollywood scene as a prodigy, starring in Top Gun and The Doors. Yet behind the glare of the spotlight, he struggled to define himself. His marriage to Joanne Whalley once, a beacon of light, ended in a bitter divorce in 1996. Separation left Kilmer grappling with depression and a growing distance from his children. His career was a roller coaster of brilliance and conflict. Labeled difficult by directors on sets like Batman Forever, he was a perfectionist in an imperfect industry. But Kilmer's greatest battle was not with critics, but with his own body. In 2015, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. The disease robbed him of his voice, the instrument of his craft, leaving him to speak through a tracheostomy tube. It was a cruel twist of fate for a man known for his articulate, booming delivery. Yet he fought back with the spirit of Doc Holliday himself, making a stirring, silent return in Top Gun Maverick. However, even the most stubborn fighters must eventually lay down their arms. In a final heartbreaking turn of events, the man who declared, "I'm your Huckleberry," faced his own sunset. On April 1st, 2025, Val Kilmer passed away at the age of 65. His journey, marked by soaring highs and crushing physical pain, came to an end. He left behind a legacy that is nothing short of iconic, a testament to the passion of art and the incredibly high price of pursuing it. Harry Carey Jr. as Marshal Fred White. Amidst the gunslingers and outlaws of Tombstone, there stood a beacon of gentle integrity. Marshal Fred White, played by the veteran Harry Carey Jr. at 72. Carey portrayed the kindly lawman who clings to ideals of justice in a world gone mad. His performance was heartbreakingly tender, depicting a man of peace swept away by senseless violence. This role was the culmination of a life spent in the saddle, both literally and metaphorically, as a scion of Hollywood royalty who struggled to carve out his own name. Born into the business in 1921, Harry Carey Jr. was the son of silent film legend Harry Carey and actress Olive Carey. He didn't just grow up in Hollywood. He grew up in the shadow of giants. He became a staple of John Ford's stock company, riding alongside John Wayne in masterpieces like The Psy, Searchers, and Three Godfathers. Yet throughout his illustrious career, he fought a silent battle against the label Harry Carey's son. It was a golden shackle, a legacy that opened doors but also trapped him in a perpetual comparison to his father. He yearned to be seen for his own merit, to establish an identity distinct from his lineage. His personal life was anchored by his marriage to Marilyn Fix, a union that weathered the storms of decades. But in 1989, just a few years before, Tombstone tragedy struck the Carey home with the force of a thunderbolt. Their eldest son, Stephen, died suddenly. The loss shattered Carey Jr., changing him on a fundamental level. It pulled him inward, away from the glitz of the industry that had been his lifeblood. If you look closely at his later roles, from Mask to Back to the Future, Part 3, you can see the sadness residing in his eyes, a grief that never truly lifted. In his final years, Carey Jr. became a man out of time. His old friends, the Duke Ben Johnson, John Ford, were all gone. The Hollywood he helped build had transformed into a place he no longer recognized. He spent his days surrounded by memories, a custodian of a history that was fading. On December 27th, 2012, the last ride ended. Harry Carey Jr. passed away quietly in a Santa Barbara hospital at the age of 91. His ashes were interred at Westwood Village Memorial Park. He left behind a legacy of unwavering dedication to the cinema, a gentle soul who finally stepped out of the shadow and into the light. Bill Paxton as Morgan Earp. Bill Paxton burst onto the screen in Tombstone as Morgan Earp, the youngest and most optimistic of the brothers. At 38, he embodied a tragic innocence, an upright gunfighter forced to confront the inevitable doom of the West. Like Morgan, Paxton was a man of boundless energy who concealed a history of silent battles behind a boyish smile. His journey to the OK Corral was paved with insecurity and a fierce determination to prove his worth. Born in Texas in 1955, Paxton's childhood was defined by instability. Financial difficulties forced his family to move frequently, denying young Bill the comfort of long-term roots. This upheaval planted a seed of deep insecurity in his heart, a loneliness that fueled a burning desire to be someone. But Hollywood is a cruel mistress. Before he became the star of blockbusters like Apollo 13 and Twister, Paxton faced years of rejection. He clawed his way up from the bottom, playing anonymous thugs and panicked soldiers, famously becoming the only actor to be killed by a Terminator, an alien, and a predator. He fought for every inch of ground he gained. Despite his success, peace was elusive. He found a soulmate in Louise Newberry and raised 2 children, yet he struggled to balance the demands of his rising star with the needs of his home. The long months away on location, the scrutiny of the public eye, and the fear of being pigeonholed weighed heavily on him. Paxton often confessed to a fear of stagnation, a worry that his current victory might be his last. He lived with the anxiety of a man who knows how quickly the tide can turn. Tragedy, when it came, was sudden and shocking. In early 2017, Paxton underwent surgery to correct a heart condition stemming from childhood rheumatic fever. We all expected him to bounce back with his signature enthusiasm. However, complications arose, leading to a second emergency surgery. Just 10 days later, the unthinkable happened. On February 25, 2017, Bill Paxton died of a stroke at the age of 61. The vibrant energy that had powered Morgan Earp was extinguished in an instant. He left behind a stunned family and a grieving industry, a reminder of how fragile even the most spirited among us truly are.